I heard him say it like I wasn't there, like I was some old chair in the corner. She disgusts me. Just a fat hippo with a bank account. 1 more month and the transfer's done. His voice was low, almost bored. He didn't even whisper like someone worried about being caught, just spoke plainly, like stating a weather report. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I kept my breathing, even one hand tucked under the blanket, the other gripping the edge a little tighter. Cameron murmured something back too soft to catch, and their footsteps padded away down the hallway. His laugh followed short and smug. I lay there staring at the ceiling, watching the slow crawl of headlights sweep across it from the street. The ceiling fan above me spun so gently it barely stirred the air. I could smell the reheated soup from earlier, the lemon peel still in the trash. The blanket over me was the one I kept on the couch for nights like this, when my joints ached and the TV didn't seem worth turning on. The money he meant. It wasn't even his money. It was a gift. Something I'd promised because I believed, still wanted to believe, he was building something for himself. A little house across town, with peeling paint and potential. I had said yes without hesitation. Told him I'd transfer part of the funds by the end of next month. Told him it would be his start. But Milo hadn't seen it as a start. He saw it as a payout. I stayed under that blanket for another hour, even after the house fell silent. Even after the porch light clicked off and his car keys rattled in the bowl by the door. I only moved when I heard the bedroom door close. Then I sat up, pushed the blanket off, and walked to the kitchen. I turned on one light. Just one, the one above the sink. The stainless steel faucet glinted. I stared at it like it might answer for him. In the quiet, I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. The bank opened at 9. I was sitting in the parking lot by 8:40, the engine off, hands still on the wheel. I watched a young teller unlock the front doors and flip the sign. The air inside the car was warm, quiet. No music, no news. Just the ticking of the cooling engine. I walked in without an appointment, but they waved me through anyway. Kayla, the branch manager, recognized me instantly. She used to sit in the 3rd row of my 8th grade homeroom class, always scribbling in the margins of her planner. Now she wore a fitted blazer and knew everything there was to know about high-yield accounts. "Miss Hemsley," she said warmly, standing. "It's been a while." I nodded, and my voice came out smooth. "I need to cancel a transfer and audit all authorized access to my accounts." She blinked, but didn't ask questions. Not the personal kind. Just clicked her mouse and got to work. I watched the screen as names and numbers scrolled by, Milo's name next to certain billings payment reminders, a joint card I'd forgotten he even had. "Let's shut that down," I said, tapping the screen. We went one by one, severing the threads. I kept my tone neutral, even friendly. When it was done, I asked for printed confirmations. Kayla placed them in a manila envelope slitted across the desk. I thanked her, smiled as I stood. "Need anything else?" she asked gently. No. That was everything I needed. By the time I got home, Milo was up padding around the kitchen, barefoot, shirtless, humming to himself, like a man with no storms coming. I made him coffee the way he liked it. Black splash of oat milk, tiny pinch of cinnamon on top. He grinned and took the mug, kissed my cheek out of habit. "Thanks, Ma." I smiled. "You're welcome." He sat at the table, scrolling his phone. I rinsed the spoon slowly and turned back to the sink. Through the window, I could see the mailbox flag still up. Something inside me stirred. I dried my hands and walked toward the hallway closet. I used to love the quiet parts of the morning before the house stirred. Now, each silence held something new. Or maybe something old that I hadn't noticed until I looked closely. The shed door in the backyard was slightly ajar. I walked out barefoot and pushed it open with my palm. Dust motes floated in the warm light. The workbench was bare. My husband's socket set gone. the vintage level he used to line the porch railing missing. I'd seen Milo take them a few months ago. He'd said he needed them for a project. Said he'd return them in a week. I never asked again. Inside the house, the guest room door was cracked open. Cameron's makeup bag sat on the dresser. 2 pairs of shoes under the bed. Her coat hung on the back of the chair I used to keep near the window. The room was never hers, but her presence filled it now. I remembered when Milo told me she was just staying for the weekend she'd had a fight with her roommate. That was 6 weeks ago. I walked to the laundry room. The hamper lid was open. On top of the pile, crumpled and damp, was the quilt. The one I made with Mabel the summer before she passed. It had taken us 2 months, 1 square at a time, stitching at the kitchen table after dinner. The blue thread was faded now. A brown stain marked one corner. It looked like coffee, or maybe wine. It didn't matter. None of this had happened overnight. That's what struck me. He hadn't broken anything, hadn't shouted. He'd crept in through comfort, through the language of family, of need. A towel I never used was hanging in the hall bathroom. My favorite mug was chipped at the rim. My grocery list was scribbled over with snack brands I didn't buy. These weren't mistakes. They were replacements. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked around, then walked to the back door, opened it gently, and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of cut grass and something else, something unsettled. Dinner that night was Milo's idea. He said it loudly, like an announcement, as if the enthusiasm might make up for the things he didn't say. Cameron stood behind him, twisting a ring on her finger, giving me a small smile that never quite reached her eyes. I set the table anyway. Old habits. Bread, roasted vegetables, chicken I'd seasoned that morning. Milo filled the silence with stories, half jokes about co-workers he barely liked, little updates about the fixer-upper he still talked about, as if the money were already his. He didn't look at me when he mentioned it, just stabbed at his plate and kept going. Cameron barely spoke. When she did, it was soft. A few words at a time, her fork moving mechanically. Twice, she glanced at me, then looked away so fast it felt like a flinch. Something in her shoulders stayed tight the entire meal. Afterward, Milo carried his plate to the sink and announced he needed to make a phone call. His footsteps went down the hall. A door closed. Cameron stayed behind, gathering the glasses with shaking hands. "You don't have to do the dishes," I said. My voice was even polite. "I don't mind," she murmured, and her eyes flicked up to mine again. Brief searching. She hesitated, then reached into her back pocket, pulled out a folded napkin, and set it on the counter in front of me. No words, no explanation. I waited until she left the room before opening it. 4 words. I didn't know. "I'm sorry." Small handwriting, tight and slanted. I read it once more, then folded it carefully. Guilt wasn't what I needed. And I had no use for apologies wrapped in whispers. I turned on the stove burner, struck a match, and held the corner of the napkin to the flame. The paper curled inward, darkening to ash. When it crumbled into the sink, I rinsed it away and wiped the basin clean. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I dried my hands on a dish towel, then walked down the hallway toward the room Milo used as an office, stopping just short of the closed door. I hadn't been there in over a year. The storage unit sat just outside town, tucked behind a strip mall and a shuttered gas station. Climate-controlled 24-hour access, a keypad at the gate. Milo didn't even know it existed. I entered the code and pulled into the lot. Unit B12. The key still hung from the old leather fob my husband had left in the drawer with the warranty papers. I slid it into the lock, turned it gently, and pulled the door open. The air inside was still and faintly metallic. The overhead light flickered once before steadying. I stood for a moment, just looking. Boxes lined the walls labeled in my handwriting and his. Tax 2001-2010 photos, Mabel winter gear. I moved toward the back where we had kept the fireproof chest, the one he insisted we use for anything that mattered. I knelt, opened it, and there it was. A plain manila envelope taped shut, labeled in his thick square lettering. Plan B. I peeled back the tape with careful fingers. Inside, property titles in my name, only copies of our marriage certificate and his will, a USB drive labeled with a date I'd long forgotten, access credentials to an account I hadn't touched in years, and a folded list of names, 2 lawyers, 1 accountant, 1 locksmith. I sat on the cold concrete floor and let it all rest in my lap. We had built a life quietly, carefully. He'd planned for emergencies, not betrayal. But somewhere, maybe deep down, he knew that security wasn't just for storms or illness. Sometimes the storm lives in your own hallway. I stayed there longer than I meant to. Then I resealed the envelope, placed it in my tote bag, and locked the unit behind me. Back in the car, I started the engine and let the air run cold against my face. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just reached over, opened the glove compartment, and slid the envelope inside. Then I shifted into drive and headed toward the grocery store, where dinner still needed planning. By late afternoon, the kitchen was warm and familiar, the kind of warm that used to mean comfort, before I learned how easily comfort could be taken for granted. I seasoned the chicken, slid it into the oven, stirred the beans until they thickened just right. The cornbread rose in the cast iron pan, the way it always had. I moved through each step calmly, without hurry, without thought. My hands remembered what my mind had already abandoned. Milo walked in just as I was setting the table, rubbing his hands together like a man arriving at a celebration. "Smells incredible, Ma," he said, with that wide grin he used to flash as a boy. "You really went all out tonight." "I felt like cooking," I answered. It wasn't a lie. I did feel like cooking, just not for the reason he believed. Cameron appeared a few minutes later, quiet as usual, offering to help. I told her I had everything under control. She didn't argue. Milo filled the silence with jokes, stories, little comments about the fixer-upper he still believed was within reach. I laughed at the right moments. Not loud, not fake, just enough. We ate. They complimented the food. Milo went back for seconds. Cameron followed his lead. It was almost peaceful if you ignored the thin film of unreality over the entire evening. After dessert, a simple berry crumble, I stood and gathered the plates before either of them could move. Milo protested weakly, but not enough to matter. I rinsed the dishes, rolled up my sleeves, and let the warm water run over my forearms as I washed. When I turned back to them, they were both smiling, or pretending to. "Thank you," I said softly. "For your company tonight," Milo chuckled. "Ma, it's just dinner." "Still," I said. "Thank you." He walked over, leaning down the way he used to when he wanted something. I kissed the top of his head. The gesture felt distant, like touching a coat on a store hanger fabric, shaped like a person, but hollow inside. "I'm going to turn in early," I told them. Then I dried my hands, turned off the kitchen lights, and headed down the hall toward my bedroom, already knowing what I would do before dawn. I woke while the sky was still dark enough to feel weightless, that thin hour before morning when even the birds hesitate. The house was silent. Milo's door was closed. Cameron's shoes were still by the entryway. Nothing moved. I slipped into my clothes, the same pair of jeans and soft sweater I always traveled in. My bag was already packed, one change of clothes, a folder of documents, a photograph of my husband I kept in a thin frame. I carried it all downstairs, careful not to let the stairs creak under my feet. The dog looked up from his bed as soon as I reached the kitchen. He didn't bark, just wagged his tail once and stood ready. He always had a sense for endings. Outside, the air held that cold stillness of early spring. I opened the car door, loaded the single bag and the small box into the back seat, and lifted the dog in after them. Everything else could stay. The couches, the dishes, the framed prints. Milo never noticed the quilt in the laundry. They'd claimed them long before this morning. Let them keep the weight of it. Back inside the kitchen, light made a soft circle on the counter. I placed a sealed envelope in the center. No name, no message, just the truth waiting inside. Property documents, trust information, sale confirmations. Enough to answer every question without needing a single word from me. I touched the envelope only once, just to steady it against a faint breeze from the vent. The house had never been his, no matter how confidently he moved through it. It had never been a future he was guaranteed. I'd bought it under the trust my husband and I built together, and last week, after my meeting with the attorney, it went under contract. In less than 10 days, another family would hold the keys. I turned off the light, checked the lock twice, then walked out the front door without looking back. The sun was still hidden behind the ridge when I started the engine and backed down the driveway, leaving the house behind as quietly as I'd lived in it. Milo called me twice that afternoon. I didn't answer. I heard about the hardware store from a friend of a friend. Small-town news always moves faster than people expect. He'd gone in to buy paint and a new drill set, probably for that house he still imagined owning. The cashier ran his card twice before saying it out loud, declined. He laughed it off, tried another. Same result. When he checked his phone, he saw it. Just 6 words on a gray screen. This account no longer exists. He must have driven home fast. I could picture it, the short walk up the front steps, the front door swinging open, and that creeping silence that settles over a place when it's already been emptied. Cameron was gone. She didn't leave a note, but she left, no doubt. The closet doors were open, the hangers bare. Her suitcase missing. All her toiletries cleared out, except the toothbrush still damp in the bathroom sink, like a final period on a short sentence. He found the envelope on the kitchen counter just where I'd left it. He opened it expecting answers, maybe instructions. Inside was the original copy of the deed. Not a copy with his name, just mine. Just the trust. Just the seal. And a yellow sticky note handwritten in ink. Not everything you walk into was meant for you. No signature. I didn't need one. He called again that night. The voicemail caught his breath halfway through a sentence. He didn't sound angry, just lost, like someone who walked into a room expecting applause and found dust. I didn't call back. Instead, I fed the dog, unpacked a single plate, and set it gently on the windowsill in the new place I'd rented. 1 fork. 1 bowl. Enough. I boiled water for tea and sat on the edge of the bed watching the steam rise. There was a knock at the door downstairs. I stood, waited a moment, and walked down quietly to see who had come. The apartment above the bakery wasn't large, but it was enough. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen windows that looked out over the street, where people drifted in and out all morning for fresh bread. The scent rose through the floorboards at dawn, warm, yeasty, steady, and for the first time in a long time, waking up felt gentle. I carried my last box up the stairs myself. No audience, no questions, no footsteps trailing behind me. The dog trotted ahead, nails tapping lightly on the worn wooden steps, tail swaying as he explored our new home. My friend Lorna, who owned the bakery, didn't ask for details. She just hugged me once, handed me a key, and said the rent would be whatever I could manage the first 2 months. I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the offer. Gratitude didn't need an explanation either. Twice a week, I helped behind the counter for a few hours, wiping tables, restocking napkins, carrying trays when the morning rush spilled onto the sidewalk. People recognized me sometimes. A few remembered me from the school. They asked how I'd been, what I'd been up to. I kept my answers light. staying busy or doing well. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole story. But not every truth needed to be shared. In the early mornings, I walked the dog along the river path. He sniffed the grass, chased a leaf or two, then settled beside me on a bench while I watched the water slide between the rocks. I didn't think about Milo, or the house, or the envelope. I didn't rehearse conversations in my head or replay the things I'd heard. The silence felt earned. My accounts were private now. The passwords were new. The numbers stable and untouched. I checked them only once a week, more out of habit than concern. There was no one left with a key to anything of mine. In the evenings, I read by the window, a small lamp casting a soft glow across the room. No interruptions. No slammed doors. No wary glances from across a dinner table. I hadn't left to punish anyone. I hadn't even left to make a point. I'd walked away because staying had felt like holding my breath. And now, for the first time in years, I inhaled fully as someone knocked softly on the bakery door below. Weeks passed before the final thread reached him. By then, Milo had moved into a cramped apartment near the interstate. No porch, no yard, just a view of the parking lot and the hum of late-night traffic. The fixer-upper was a name he didn't mention anymore. Cameron hadn't returned. Whatever messages he sent went unanswered. Whatever excuses he made, no one seemed to buy them anymore. The courier arrived just after noon. A thin man in a blue windbreaker, carrying a flat envelope with a notarized seal. Milo signed without reading. Still half asleep, one sock on the television muttering in the background. When he finally opened it, he sat down hard on the arm of the couch. Notice of sale. Final confirmation of transfer. Statement of trust ownership. A copy of the original deed, my name, not his. A copy of the revocation of financial access, dated weeks before the day he called me, just a fat hippo with a bank account. There was no message inside, no warning, no letter to soften the facts, just ink and legal seals. Paper that made things permanent. He didn't call. He couldn't. The number was no longer in service. Across town, I sat in the window above the bakery, a warm mug in my hands. The dog curled at my feet. The steam from the tea touched my face, soft and clean. Outside, people passed by on foot, laughing, chatting, carrying their lives in canvas bags and crumpled receipts. None of them looked up. None of them knew what I'd left behind. And that felt right. I hadn't come here to disappear. I'd come here to remember what it meant to take up space without apology, to live in rooms that didn't echo someone else's voice, to eat when I was hungry, not when I was needed. The mailman passed below. A child dropped a coin and chased it down the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, someone was frosting a cake and humming off-key. I finished my tea, rinsed the mug, and hung it gently on the hook by the stove.